What are the fuel costs per mile for an EV and a petrol car? A standard flat rate electricity tariff can give low fuel costs for an EV. Smart time of use tariffs, offering cheap rates of about 7p per kilowatt hour, promise fuel costs of 2p per mile. It's impossible. The price of petrol at the pump is high, but it's not due to the petrol fuel cost. Let's take a look at what's happening. Home electricity time of use plans offer a cheap rate and a peak rate at different times of the day. Typically, the cheap rate is overnight and the peak rate is during the day. The cheap rate is used for charging the EV. This is a typical tariff showing the peak and cheap rates in pence per kilowatt hour, plus the daily standing charge. Energy is consumed by home appliances and for charging the EV. The number of kilowatt hours on each rate are used to calculate the energy consumed for the day. This is how the cost is calculated. The easiest way is to look at your bill, and the average electricity rate is the total cost divided by the total number of kilowatt hours. The average home electricity use with no EV, the average daily EV charge. The typical charging mix is mostly at home with occasional public charges. Here are the average electricity rates for a home with an EV. The time of use plan is cheaper than the standard plan for the average user. Using public chargers increases the cost compared to home-only charging. The typical cost to charge an EV from home is not 7.5 pence per kilowatt hour. The typical EV electricity rate depends on the home use and the public charger use. The same cars are used as before. The cost per mile calculation. The results seem to show that the fuel cost per mile for an EV is cheaper than a petrol car. But it's an apples to oranges comparison because they are taxed differently. The petrol fuel has both VAT and fuel duty taxes. Most of the cost is tax. Comparing the fuel cost in the UK to that in the USA, the British pay more tax on a litre of petrol than the Americans pay for the litre of petrol. A pre-tax comparison reveals that the fuel cost per mile for the petrol car is cheaper than the EV, even when using the cheapest time of use electricity tariff in the UK. The reason no one is aware of this is due to the high taxes paid on petrol fuel, equivalent to about 5 pence per mile tax. The transition from petrol cars to EVs means that the UK Treasury is losing a lot of tax revenue. The government is currently looking into ways of taxing EVs, possibly via a tax per mile system.